see how sexual sin relates to child sacrifice, I think we ought to really notice this. This chapter, it's all about sexual sin, and all of a sudden then there is a verse about offering your children to Molech. Now, we do have a picture. I don't know how big it is on the screen. Can we put that slide on the screen? That's me. Okay. This is an artist's rendering of the worship of Molech, and it was believed to be a Canaanite practice that then influenced the Israelites, because there are certain kings of Israel that actually practiced this, including, by the way, the wives of Solomon practiced this. They would take their babies and put it into the hands of this heat. There was a place for fire and wood down inside this brass idol that would heat up these arms to glowing heat. And the idea was, if we will offer our child, our firstborn, sometimes it was the firstborn, our baby to this God, he will bless us materially, agriculturally. And so the worshiping of these gods involved child sacrifice. And God, every time he ever mentions it, says it has never come into his mind that anything like this should ever happen. He never calls for people to do that. And if you think about the sexual sin and the tie to sacrificing of children, it's not hard for us to see the culture that we live in. We may think, well, we're not so backwards that anybody would ever do that. But I wonder if that's really true. We live in a culture that right now, the cultural war is heated back up over this very issue. Maybe it'll be the pressing issue of this next election. Let me read you. This is from the New York Times, and it is an article and also the majority opinion by Chief Justice Justice Kennedy of the Supreme Court at the time. The New York Times, it was published in response to a number of recently passed pro-life laws under the misleading title, "Don't Ban Equality." It read in part, "It's time for companies to stand up for reproductive health care. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health, independence, and economic stability of our employees and customers. Simply put, it goes against our values and is bad for business." Put a bit more succinctly, the writer says, restricting abortion is bad for business. Or phrased a bit more honestly, abortion is good for business. In other words, abortion must be preserved for the sake of business. Then they ask the question, how does that sit with you? To be as charitable as possible, the ad sponsors were trying to address this underlying reality. Pregnancy and babies unequally affect women's professional careers. This cannot be denied. But is abortion the answer? Justice Anthony Kennedy, in his 1992 majority opinion for Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which upheld Roe versus Wade, wrote, "For 2 decades of economic and social developments, people have organized intimate relationships and made choices that define their views of themselves and their places in society in reliance on the availability of abortion in the event that contraception should fail. The ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives." Isn't that interesting? Do you hear the reasoning behind why there must be abortion? It has to do with economics. It has to do with equality in terms of being able to work. The writer goes on to say, King Solomon set up the shrine to Molech in the valley of Hinnom. By the way, if you've never been to Israel, you might not know that there are 3 valleys that come through Jerusalem geographically. The valley of Hinnom, in Greek, is what we know of as Gehenna. G-E-H in Hebrew is valley. Hinnom, the valley of Hinnom. Gehenna is where the fires for the city dump perpetually burn. It is also where these offerings were made to Molech, and it is the word for hell. And what a description of what was happening in those valleys and what is happening in these abortion clinics. But anyway, it's interesting to me that sexual sin related to child sacrifice. You know, God says a lot about blood in the Bible. We've read a lot about it, studied about it even in Leviticus and Genesis. But we go back, remember, Cain kills Abel, and then God comes to Cain and asks him a question. Do you remember the question he asked him? Where's your brother? And you remember his answer? Am I my brother's keeper? By the way, the answer to that is yes. But he didn't know that. And of course, he was lying. And he killed him and he buried him. And then the Lord said this, the blood of your brother, it cries to me from the ground. Now listen, we know what it was crying. How do we know this? Fast forward in your Bibles to the book of Revelation. We're now in the Great Tribulation period, and the souls of those who were beheaded for their faith in Jesus during the Great Tribulation, they're yet to die, by the way. They're not dead yet, but they will be martyred for their faith. Under the altar are crying out, how long, holy and true, dost thou fail to avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? In other words, the blood of the innocent always cries out to a holy God for justice. And God says to Cain, the blood of your brother is crying to me from the ground that I judge you, is what he was saying. And of course, God did put a mark on Cain and there was a judgment. But very interesting, he deserved to die and God mercifully allows him to live. You know, it is so crazy that our world has the value system that it does. Do you know it is at least a misdemeanor and sometimes a felony to disturb the egg of a bald eagle? If you damage, steal, destroy the egg of an eagle, you're going to jail. But you can kill a baby in the womb, totally legal. And they're trying to make it more legal to be able to do so even longer than they currently have the right to do it. It's insane.